discussing how to create variables. It's basically where every programming language starts. Well, in most cases, people would start with printing hello world. I would also tell you how to print hello world, but before that, I'll actually teach you what variables are. Right now on the screen, what you're seeing is the VS Code IDE that we downloaded in the previous video. So this is how it's gonna look. And what you have to do is you have to go to the file and do open folder, or you can do a new folder where you can actually create a new folder and store all your code in that particular folder to keep it organized. So I already created a folder called code here. What you can do is you can create a new file. You can do this from here too. So go to create a new file, name it whatever. So let's name it variables.py. This .py extension is very important because this is what tells the compiler or the interpreter that this is indeed a Python file. So once we do that and create the file, it should actually do it. So here you can see the file itself is in the folder called code, which I built right now. It would ask you to extensions, which you should actually get. And here are some good extensions. Let me show you actually. So if I can go to the extensions and search for Python, this one is the extension you should get for Python because this is officially supported. It also supports for autocomplete, which you need when you actually develop very big projects, and many more. So after this, you should have the support of Python. So you can write Python code in this file. This is essentially a file which you can save and then run in the Python shell. So you should already be able to run Python straight from the VS Code using this button, run Python file. For each program, the most basic thing it can do is print something on the screen. For Python, it's done using the print function. I use the name function because it is what it is. It is a function. So what's a function? Well, we'll discuss about that later on, but just know that if you write print and then give these two brackets, it will print something on the screen. So how? If we just pass, let's say, hello world, and save the file using Control S or Command S, and if I click this button, run Python file, it should actually give us hello world. This is what it does. This prints hello world onto the screen. So what if I change this from hello world to, let's say, 12? It's a number, right? So if I save it and so after running it, you get 12 as it should because you printed 12 in this file. Similarly, you can print anything. So if I just write a random bunch of characters and then save it and then run it, it should actually give us the string of characters that we wrote. This is, by the way, called a string. This is a data type. The interesting thing about Python is we can actually store these things somewhere. And what do we call that something where we store it? Well, technically it's a box, but we call it variables in the language of programming. So what would happen is you would have to tell Python that you are storing something. So just like in math, when you define x is equal to 10, that is exactly how variables are used in Python. You tell that x is equal to 10, or you're putting 10 inside x. That's how variables work. So let's say I want to store a name. So let's call name, which will be the name of the variable. Name itself is the name of the variable. And we'll set the string, let's say Tom. Tom is the name that we are storing inside the name variable. We can also store, let's say, his age, which would be age is equal to 23. Tom is 23 years old. So you see how I'm storing these values inside these variables, so-called. That's how you can store data in Python and use them later on. Let's talk about all the things these variables can do. So first of all, they can store literally anything. So imagine it's a magic box, right? This is a magic box. It's called a variable. Let's call it A. Let's say you want to store a number, 12, let's say. And you would want to put this 12 inside this magic box. So then it would become 12 in here. So whenever we want to access the number 12 later on, what we can do is we can just look into the box of A, the box called A, and then we'll get 12, which is exactly what we needed. That's how variables work. In Python, variables can store everything and anything. Whatever you want to store, a variable can store it, whatever it is. Maybe you want to store a big number, let's say 1, 2, 3. This is a big number, a variable can store it. Let's say you want to store someone's name. So let's say Bale. Bale is a name. It's what's called a string. We'll talk about strings later. So it can also store in the same variables. That's the thing. If you define one variable, let's say the all variable, and you set it to some number, let's say 2, 3, 4, 5 in Python. What you can also do is you can call the same variable, the all variable, and you can then set it to something else, let's say Sam. The thing is, this is an integer, this is a number, integer, but this is a string. And you can absolutely do this in Python. And that's exactly where you avoid all kinds of junk variables which you would often have to make if you were doing any other programming language. You essentially don't need to know what you're storing. You just create something, let's say A, and you store whatever. So you can store 12, or you can store a character A, let's say, or you can store even big strings like someone's name, or you can store anything. You can even store what's called objects. We'll discuss about objects in a later class, but just know that they are really big and not really easy to store into variables. But in Python, you can actually simply do it like A is equal to an object. This here will be an object. We'll talk about them later on. Let's see how it works in code. Coming back to our example, we see that we created a variable called x. This here is an integer. This is how you create comments in Python. Comments are essentially lines that do not get executed. So if I write something, oops, then this here will be ignored, because after hash, the interpreter, the Python interpreter, ignores the entire line. So let's say if I create this, print something, it won't actually print that something because that is being ignored. But if we actually like copy and paste it without the comment line, it'll then go ahead and print it. That's it. Comments are basically ignored by the Python interpreter. Anyway, off topic. So this x is equal to 10 is basically an integer. This name, which was set to Tom, is basically a string. This age, which is set to 23, is also an integer. You can also store his grade. So grade, grade is equal to, let's make a character A. So this is a character. You can store anything. Let's say I want to change grade from a character to a score, a number. So what we can do is we can simply do grade, oops, Garrett, grade is equal to, let's say 10. He got 10. So grade is now an integer. You can literally change the type of a variable just like that, which you would not be able to do in most languages. Let me show you how it can store objects. So what I've done here is I've created what's called a class. You don't need to worry about classes just yet, but know that they are ways of grouping code together and making sense of something in an abstract way. Anyway, we'll discuss about them later on, but the main point here is we can create what's called an object of this class. An object is basically an instance, or you can say like, let's say we have a car class. So we want to have, let's say, a Ford. A Ford is basically a car. So what we can do is we can simply call or say Ford, which is a car. Ford right now is basically an object. Ford is a car. So it can also store objects like these. We'll discuss about how you can use this method of programming, which is called object-oriented programming, later on. There are many types of data that's available for you to use in Python. For instance, you can make numbers. So if we call num is equal to 10, this is a number, an integer. There are floats as well. So if you use float, I'll use 2 t's because float itself is a keyword. So let's say I want to store a float. So I'll do 12.4. It's a float value. It's storing a float value. Let's say I want to store a string. So I'll do string is equal to some string. Let's say I want to store a character. I'll use single quotes C. I could have also used double quotes, but We don't need to, because this is way clearer to distinguish from like actual strings, string literals. You can also store hexadecimal values in Python. So let's do hex a, and we'll use the hexadecimal way of writing things. So you'll use 0x. This is how you say that the number is going to be a hexadecimal number. So let's write ff. This is an hexadecimal number, and hexa is storing this number. This is an actual hexadecimal number. And if we go ahead and print all of these, so we'll get num. And I'm going to use a shortcut, Shift Alt and downward keys, and we'll get all of these copies. So let's do float. Oops. Let's do string, character, and hex a. If you go ahead and run this code, we'll get 10, 12.4, some string, the character C, and the hexadecimal value, the integer converted hexadecimal value of ff, which is 255. So this was our first ever Python program where we discussed how to store data, what variables are, and how you can use those variables to do some things. Like in this case, we printed the variables, but later on we can manipulate the data to accomplish some goal. Let's say we want to make a calculator, so we would need a variable called sum, which would hold the sum values. Let's say we want to sum 12 plus 43, it can hold the value. So if we want to make a calculator, we would need variables to store data. So in this way, you can make use of variables, and variables are used in almost every single program out there. There's probably no program out there which does not use variables. So variables is the fundamental concept of programming, and that's what we covered today. If you like this video, then give a like. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time.